So everyone, thank you so much for coming to our presentation this afternoon, sponsored by the Research Committee of Counselors to Social Justice. This presentation is going to be entitled, Why Do Black People Become Counselors? Results of a Grounded Theory Study. My name is Dr. Marlon Johnson, and I am the chair of the Professional Development Committee. I would love to present to you all our four panelists, researchers, scholars, leaders inside of our field. And I will start with Dr. Michael Hannon. So Dr. Hannon is a Black man, husband, and father who also happens to be a counselor, professor, and author. His personal and professional roles converge to inspire his community work, to unapologetically advocate for the well-being of Black fathers and father figures, particularly fathers of autistic people. Dr. Hannon's expertise about the Black father's wellness has been featured by outlets including National Public Radio, New York Times, Autism Speaks, Thrive Global, Huffington Post, Waymaker Journal, and the Black Enterprise magazine. His research has been cited over 500 times. His edited book, Black Fathering and Mental Health, was published by Peter Lang Academic Publishers in March 2022, and his second book, Protect, Provide, Prepare, Black Fatherhood Code in Family and Community, will be published in December 2024. As an educator, Dr. Hannon is an associate professor at Montclair State University, where he teaches in the counseling program. And he is also a counselor at the Center for Marcus in Trenton, New Jersey. And Dr. Hannon has earned his doctorate degree in counselor ed and supervision from the Pennsylvania State University, as well as an educational specialist degree in counseling services from Rider University and a master's in student affairs and higher ed practice, and his bachelor's from the University of Delaware. Next, we have Ms. LaShawn Adams, who identifies as a cisgender Black woman from Newark, New Jersey. And she is a second-year doctoral student and research fellow at Montclair State University's counseling program. She is a licensed associate counselor and national certified counselor in the state of New Jersey. She is the president of Chi Sigma Iota chapter here at Montclair State University. And she currently teaches master's counseling courses in addition to conducting individual and group counseling sessions at Heart's Empowerment Counseling Center at Montclair State University. And Montclair State University. Her research interests include centering the experiences of marginalized populations, including people of color, adoptees, and more. She adopts an intersectional framework that acknowledges all facets of an individual's identity and examines counseling relationships and dynamics from various perspectives. She is passionate about social justice advocacy and creating safe and brave spaces where individuals can feel a sense of belonging. Next, we have Dr. David Julius Ford, Jr. Now, Dr. Ford holds a BA in psychology and an MA in counseling, both from Wake Forest University, and a PhD in counselor education and supervision at Old Dominion University. He is licensed in North Carolina, Virginia, and New Jersey, as a nationally certified counselor and an approved counseling supervisor. He is an assistant professor of counseling at Monmouth University and is the immediate, no, you're an associate professor. That's correct.
Department chair.
And department chair of counseling at Monmouth University. Thank you for that correction. And is the immediate and is a past president of the New Jersey Counseling Association. Dr. Ford's professional interests are Black men in higher education, career counseling, addictions counseling, supervision, group work, qualitative research, queer and trans BIPOC individuals, and persons living with HIV and AIDS. He is an inaugural doctoral NBCC Minority Fellow and is the 2020 recipient of the AMCD Samuel H. Johnson Distinguished Service Award and the 2020 ACES Outstanding Counselor Education and Supervision Article Award. He is a classically trained pianist and is a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. He is as an undergraduate, he also had the privilege of taking a class taught by the late Dr. Maya Angelou. Last but certainly not least, we have Ms. Estefanie Ceballo. And Estefanie has over 10 years of clinical experience. Prior to co-founding her private practice, Aspire to Grow Mental Health Counseling, PLLC, she has worked in numerous settings, including outpatient mental health, private practice, school settings, and in-home community counseling. Her specialties include counseling with individuals and families from different intersections and marginalizations, specifically individuals age 5 and older, as well as individuals who've experienced trauma. So thank you all for being willing to share your research and your work and your expertise with us today. I'll hand it over to you.
Peace, buenos dias, assalamu alaikum. I hope everybody's doing well. My friends call me Mike, and I need to set the record right. We may not set it straight. We're going to set it right, though. Estefanie and Shawnee Adams are both doctoral candidates at Montclair State University, and I need to apologize to them publicly for not sending a more updated bio on them, because they are achieving in ways that we all celebrate. So in that regard, happy Black History Month to everybody who's under the sound of my voice. You've heard a little bit about us. I just want to say thank you to the CSJ family. Dr. Alfonso Ferguson and Dr. Marlon Johnson are two of my favorite people, and it's a pleasure for us to be here with you, and especially on a Friday afternoon. I want to make sure I say as well that the results we're going to share today is a study that has been funded by the Association for Counselor Education and Supervision by an ACES research grant from 2022 and a 2023 Montclair State University institutional grant. And so I want to make sure we pay the bills in that regard. But we're super excited to share with you. So let me share my screen. We're going to work hard to get through the content so that we can ask questions and have some really good discourse. Bear with me 1 second as my Zoom learning curve continues to shrink, and we get this right. Let's see here. Somebody give me a thumbs up if you see a handsome Black man shaking a pretty Black woman's hand in that picture. Cool. We want to start literally with this research question: why do Black people become counselors? And the team and I decided to use a grounded theory research design to try to answer this question. And as we get through, we're just going to move. I usually, whether I'm working with colleagues and friends like the ones who are on this call, or other folks, I usually try to set our intentions very clearly, in the same way we would in a counseling relationship when we're treating clients who are in need and deserving of support. Our intention with this presentation and this ongoing work is really reflective of the principle, the Kwanzaa principle of Kuumba, which stands for creativity. And it essentially means, listen, however you inherited your community, by the time you're done, it needs to be better by the work that you've done. And this project and the privilege I have with working with not just my 3 colleagues here, but 2 others who weren't able to make it, it is our whole unapologetic purpose to make counseling better than how we found it. And it's really a pleasure to be here with them and engaging in this work. If today's successful, we want you to be able to report on what Black counselors report, or be able to articulate on what Black counselors report on their reasons for joining the profession. If it's successful, we will offer and learn from you as well about some of the systematic ways counseling programs can more effectively recruit, retain, and graduate Black students. And we'll hear a bit about the in-depth experiences of Black counselors that either sustain or inhibit their professional development. So the silly side of me, I wanted to, I'm going to show my age here. If you know Deborah Cox and RL, they had a song called How Do We Get Here? And I was going to put a clip in here. I see people shaking their heads, right? You knew, but I was like, we only got like 35 minutes, so I can't do that. But I do want to give us some context for all of you who've been through your master's programs, who've been through EDS programs and other post-bachelor's programs. And you know how this goes. We got to do a lit review to determine and to empirically justify our research questions. We know what we want to know. Our experiential knowledge says it's worth investigating, but the systems in which we work say, well, you need to justify why you want to investigate these particular questions. I know I'm talking to some doctoral candidates in this room right now. But how we got here was really our team set out to try to find the trends that exist in our counseling programs to determine what is keeping Black folks out, what's attracting Black folks. And in 2022, with colleague and sister friend, Dr. Ebony E. White, immediate past president of CSJ, I want to say, and a doctoral candidate at Montclair State University, Halston Fleming, and I wrote this paper that actually opened up the last special issue in Counselor Education and Supervision on anti-racism in counselor education, anti-racist practices, anti-racist pedagogy. And what we attempted to do was really just call in the profession to say, hey, we got a pretty ugly history, and until we reconcile this history, we probably can't be as diverse, inclusive, just, and create belonging spaces as we aspire to in all of the position statements that ACA publishes. And so what's cited frequently in this paper, and in many of the things that you do now as researchers and clinicians, we documented what CACREP has reported to be Black student enrollment in their accredited programs. And so if you remember in 2017, CACREP, the Council for the Accreditation of Counseling and Related Educational Programs, they said in 2017, there were less than 20% of students who were enrolled, Black students who were enrolled in their accredited programs. And in the most recent report that was published in 2022, that was just over 16%. So the interesting thing was in 2017, there were probably approximately 60% of white students enrolled. And in 2022, there were 55% of white students enrolled. So you see the decrease in white overrepresentation in our counseling programs, but you see a decrease also in the number of Black students who enroll. Thankfully, it does mean that there are other students who are marginalized and underrepresented or historically excluded, if we want to be precise. There's more students of color who are enrolled in our programs, but we're like, for those of us who care and are curious, what's happening with the Black folks? And the thing about it is, Black students, it's fairly predictable because over time, people in our field, researchers, counselor educators, clinicians have been already reporting consistently that Black counseling students and faculty report counseling program climates to be isolating, hostile, tokenizing. Feel free to look up the research of Dr. Carla Atkinson Johnson, Dr. Cheryl Holcomb McCoy, Dr. Michael Brooks, Dr. Sam Steen, Dr. Natoya Haskins, former ACES president. They've all been documenting, Dr. Kent Butler, we've all been documenting what our counseling program environments have been like for us meaning Black folks and very, very frequently other students of color or who have other marginalized identities. The sad part about this is not just that we are underrepresented and have been historically excluded from our programs. It's that this phenomenon has bearing on the workforce. Because you know and I know, if you're doing any practicing right now in educational settings, K through 16, or in community and clinical settings, you know that more and more Black and other people of color are seeking mental health treatment and services in record numbers. And they're asking, if they get the opportunity to articulate their preferences, they're asking for Black and other mental health professionals of color to treat them, right? And there's no coincidence. It's the same way that anybody else would ask for somebody who they believe shares an identity, shares a social location, shares an experience, shares the knowledge that when I say, how do we get here, that everybody on the call said, yeah, I know what you're talking about when you reference Deborah Cox and RL, right? We're looking for people with whom we can identify, and that's happening for Black folks. So we said to ourselves, we're going to begin to find out what the research is telling us. And so I try to just highlight some of the things that the research informed us about and what our scholars have said in prior publications and in trends from like huge data sources like the National Center for Educational Statistics, but also our counseling journals, our peer-reviewed journals, ACA division journals, and things like that. We attribute our hypothesis, essentially, what we inferred from the literature was that Black people have been historically excluded from the counseling profession. I know that there are many more Black social workers. There are far less Black psychologists and our other allied mental health professions. But in this here counseling, it's safe to say, it's safe to infer that three reasons have excluded us. Three forces have excluded us. Systemic racism in counselor education. We don't understand career development in Black and brown people. We got a whole lot of career development theories about other people. But what we don't know is why Black folks choose the careers they do, recognizing that career development is a staple and it is interwoven in the history of professional counseling. And we understand that Black folks and other folks of color have endured inequitable access to treatment and biased treatment when they do get it from the systems that are supposed to serve us, or they articulate the desire to serve us. And so these three reasons hopefully set the foundation for us trying to answer the question, why do Black people choose to become professional counselors? And hopefully that gives us some context of how we move forward. I'm going to stop talking and turn the floor over to my homie and my friend for life, Dr. David Julius Ford Jr.
That I echo Dr. Hannon's gratitude to CSJ for allowing us the stage to talk about our work. So let's dive right into our innovative reference framework. Throughout our study, we wanted to ground it in some already established frameworks that are based on us. And so let's talk about critical race theory. And just to be clear, all of the backlash against critical race theory is just white folks' fear of Black people. And they have no understanding of what it is. So I want to set the record straight about what critical race theory is. Its core is that racism is ordinary and is interwoven into the fabric of this nation. Annika Nikki Haley says, this fucked up country has always been racist in the beginning. And what needs to happen is that we need to start telling our stories, even though in some places those stories are being stifled by law. So critical race theory provides that foundation for us to not only critically dissect, but to oppose those racist systems that exist. Because racism manifests itself in our criminal justice system. Can you hear me now? All right. The criminal justice system, our health system, financial markets, and education. And one prime example is the redlining back in the 50s, when they actually drew red lines around certain neighborhoods. Those red lines were based on the racial makeup of those neighborhoods. And so what happened was they purposefully underfunded those neighborhoods, put all the resources out, and then didn't allow those residents to have mortgages in certain neighborhoods. And so the people that were in the other neighborhoods were able to come in, buy up the property, rebuild it, called gentrification, and then price the residents out of those neighborhoods, and they were forced into impoverished areas. That was legal. You know, we use the term eminent domain, and that's just another term for racism. So again, critical race theory is this premise that our nation is built on racism and it's woven into all fibers of this country. Process theory of regression. It is the process of becoming Black. And it's based in Bill Cross's own racial identity development as a member of the Black Panther Party and being a very fair-skinned Black man. And when I talk about this with my students, I say, even though the diagram may look linear, it is not a linear process. People tend to cycle in and out of each of those different levels. You have your re-encounter, when you have an anti-Black, pro-white stance, and you don't feel yourself as Black. You tend to shun anything being Black. Then you go into the encounter phase when you go into counter racism, and it shocks up your equilibrium. So you go into this immersion stage where you don't want to be around anything but Black people. You immerse yourself into Blackness. You just, you're very pro-Black. The way you dress, the way you look changes to become this really, really Black individual. And then as you resolve that conflict, go into the commitment phase, which is when you are able to embrace your Black fight for other groups that are marginalized and still be integrated into general society. And so these two critical frameworks ground the work that we've done, looking at the racism that's in our profession and looking at the identity development of those Black people in the profession and that have chosen to become counselors. Right. So the guiding research question: what motivates Black people to become professional counselors? So this is kind of birthed out of our own experience as Black people in the profession. And so we wanted to gauge not only what made us become counselors, but what made those that are in the profession become counselors. We wanted to hear the story. We wanted to hear the stories of people that are in the profession, and they create this theory that explains why we become counselors. Then we wanted to use this information to assist counseling programs into being more inclusive in their recruiting, inclusive in their matriculation of students, and then to make sure our profession is inclusive and welcoming to more Black people. We want to make the counseling profession Black. So now I will turn it over to our esteemed colleague, future Dr. Estefanie Ceballo.
I think this is still you, Dr. Ford.
I can jump in real fast, no big deal. Dr. Ford alluded to making a choice about our research design. And for those of you who have the opportunity and or privilege to do empirical research and trying to get your research curiosities and your clinical curiosities questioned by way of conducting research, we decided that the best way to answer this question, as Dr. Ford said, was to see what folks had to say about their motivating factors and use what they said to propose an explanation. For those of you who are familiar with qualitative research traditions, y'all know we can do ethnographies, we can do autoethnographies, we can do phenomenological studies, we can do self-studies. But in this particular case, we wanted to develop a theory that was grounded in the data. And a grounded theory approach that we all know, we cite very frequently, the Merriam and Tisdale and the Cresswell and Poth, right? We know what grounded theory is designed to do, and it is designed to explain, not solely describe, right? And that was us making decisions and having very spirited conversations about an appropriate design, because what a grounded theory allows us to do is construct a theory validated through the words and experiences of the contributors who are giving us the information that we're asking. Hopefully it's reflective of the data through rigorous data collection and analysis, as the slide indicates. And then as a result of the analysis process and checking and validating with the contributors who have been so brave, courageous, and generous enough to share their stories, we develop a theory by interpreting occurrence of a collective phenomenon. And these are the things I want you to consider for those methodologists in the space. Grounded theory, taking into account the causal conditions, context, and intervening variables that contribute to the phenomenon, right? So asking a sample of Black professional counselors about the causal conditions, the context, and the variables that prompted them to say, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna enroll in a counseling program. I wanna be a school counselor. I wanna work in community mental health. I wanna work in rehabilitation counseling. I wanna work with folks who are struggling with substance use. And this was the reason why we chose this particular research design. I hope that makes sense. And we'll pass it on to Steph now.
My apologies. In order for us to investigate what motivates Black people to become professional counselors, we did have a eligibility criteria. So all the participants involved in our research had to identify as Black, which meant either continental African, Black American, Afro-Caribbean, Afro-Latina. They all had to be members of the counseling profession, speak and understand American English, and they all had to be adults, so they had to be over 18. which then left us with a total sample of 28 participants. When we examined our participants and their ages, we came up with a mean age of, or there was a mean age of 39.5 years old, 6 of which were counselor educators, 4 were master degree students, counselors in training, and 18 were practicing counselors who have earned a master's degree and this included current doctoral students. In addition, we recruited from counseling program listservs and social media pages, and our data collection involved semi-structured interviews, which we inquired about what influenced participants to become counselors. And then all the interviews were then recorded and transcribed. So part of the analysis process is this extensive process, which we then engaged in open coding, which is the part of the research where the coding is the interviews are broken up into distinct parts and codes, and open coding is really identifying frequently occurring words and that describe the phenomenon. So in this case, the researchers reviewed the transcriptions and open coded the transcriptions. And then after that, it was reviewed by another researcher. Then after we engaged in open coding, there was some axial coding, which part of what Dr. Hannon was saying earlier is the looking for causal conditions, context, and intervening variables, which really means examining the relationships between the codes that were being reported with each other. So we, in this process, explored some core themes that related to what motivates Black counselors or Black people to join the profession and to become counselors. After that axial coding occurred, then there was consensus coding, which the researchers came together, examined both the axial coding and the open codes to make sure that everything that was analyzed, we came to a consensus about what we were hearing from the participants. In this process, the researchers then focused on specific codes. So the specific codes that we were looking at included what motivated Black counselors to join the profession. Then again, came back again for consensus coding so that we could decide that we all agreed that this is what was motivating Black people to join the profession. And then throughout this process, there were several trustworthy strategies. So we did some member checking. We had, there was an audit trail, there was peer reviews, all in the process of making sure that we were honoring our participants and their experiences.
So now the fun part, which is to talk about our findings and how we established our grounded theory. I'm not gonna hold y'all. It took us a while to get here, but once we got here, it has been a privilege to get these results. So what we found in our results is, as we were learning, we endeavored to learn and develop this grounded theory about like why Black people decided to become counselors in this study. We identified a grounded contributors response, which was a set of interacting and influencing factors that inspired them to become factors. So as you can see, we developed a chart in a framework, and our most grounding motivator for what motivated Black people to become counselors was they wanted to challenge cultural mandates. So that was the grounding factor. No matter what, that was the thing that ultimately motivated Black people to become counselors. But as you can see, under the challenging cultural mandates, there's 2 other secondary motivators, which were Black representation. And as you can see, it's under that is in parentheses because we saw that Black people felt the Black representation was a motivator for them to join the profession, and Black underrepresentation was a motivator for them to join the profession. And then on the secondary motivator was personal and professional convictions. And under both of those is a third tier, which, as you can see under Black underrepresentation, is adult senior influencers and negative counseling experiences. And under personal and professional convictions is altruistic dispositions and values of justice and equity. And so I want to say, no matter where our participants entered, right? Whether, for example, a lot of our participants had an adult senior influencer. Like, I went to church and I met a person who was a counselor, and I was like, dang, I want to grow up to be just like them. Like, that was that Black representation. However, then they had the justice and values and equity, and that called them into action. No matter where participants ended up in this diagram, it called them into action. And that's why you see call to action interwoven into everything, because that call to action piece was what ultimately helped them to challenge the cultural mandate, which is the grounding motivator for everything. So if you go to the next slide, we have some of our participants' quotes that we just wanted to share. And so for the first one, I really wanted to become a counselor because there's a lack of counselors of colors in schools. I'm pretty sure there's people on this Zoom call who have heard there's not many counselors of color or Black counselors specifically out there. And also, the people on this Zoom call can probably recall if counseling was a topic that was even discussed in your homes and or in your communities. So that Black representation was a big piece that we saw within our findings as we were analyzing our results. And then we have, so then I worked with the suicide prevention program at a junior college, and the director of that program actually had an MFT degree, and I was currently in my first semester. So I was actually starting like a master's in public health. And then I met this lady who had an MFT, and I was like, MFT, that's the thing? Like, I can do that? And so, yeah, I can sort of drop that program, and I was like, all right, like at some point I'm going to do this counseling because it just made sense. It speaks to that calling that a lot of our participants described as they were telling us or explaining what motivated them to become counselors. Sometimes it was the Black representation that linked with the calling, but sometimes it was also just that I want to be there. I want to be present. I had experiences growing up in which that led me to therapy personally, and it was difficult to find a therapist who I could identify with, who I didn't have to explain in detail about why something was upsetting to me. And I had some experiences that were so difficult that I didn't return to counseling for several years. I wanted to be able to offer that to people in similar situations. So there is the personal and professional convictions, but also those negative experiences. A lot of our participants had that, whether it was in their master's or doctoral programs, whether it was in their experiences as counselor educators. It still motivated them to become counselors or stay counselors so that they can be representation, so that they can defy or challenge cultural mandates for the quality of care that Black people should have. And I'm trying to go through this because you don't got that much time, but I want to go to the next slide, right? And so it was a calling for me. It was the right thing to do. What we saw a lot within our findings was people saying, I always knew I was going to be a counselor. I always knew that I wanted to help. I always knew that I was good. I'm the friend that everybody called. Like, we got that a lot within our findings, and we determined that that was on our third tier under our personal and professional convictions, in which motivated people to become counselors. That calling, that call to action, not just a calling, but a call to the profession and a call into action. I've always had this desire to want to help kids, or especially teenagers, kind of that were like me, and that phase in time was feeling misunderstood and, needing supports, guidance, and even needing to kind of sometimes get out of my own way. What we found with a lot of our participants in the finding is that they just wanted to make a difference. And so that challenging cultural mandates piece was creating a different narrative for Black people in the counseling profession, having Black people be viewed as different, but also how do we show up and how people can respect us as Black people, because we deserve the same quality of care as non-Black people, period. And then we have, and just like it just really got me thinking like, whoa, I could do something outside of being applied, behavior analysis, where, you're taking data and frequency and all of that stuff, and you can do things kind of beyond that. That's a little bit more natural to you. And so I started to really think, if somebody told me about counseling and I just started to read more about it and I just started to see showing up in different areas in my life that people were just kind of drawn to me for my ability to just sit and be that non-invasive presence, and being that reflective mirror for people. And I started to see that it worked. We got a lot of participants that describe being that person for a lot of people. And that just called them into the profession and motivated them to become counselors. And so ultimately, like I said, it was 3 tiers, but I will leave it to Dr. Hannon to bring us into the discussion about, so what? What does that mean for us in the profession? Or what could that mean for us in the profession?
Yeah, I'm gonna do my best, and I appreciate folks' willingness to have us move through this with some pace, because we really want to chat with
Sorry.
y'all. No, it's fine. No apology. Your apologies are not even welcome here. Um, but seriously, so when we have the privilege to do this kind of work, this kind of really in-depth investigation about really important topics that not just resonate in the profession, but also resonate with us professionally and personally, at the end of this process, we end up saying to ourselves, just like Shawnee said, so what? What does this mean? What do these findings mean? And how is it applicable to the work that we do as professional counselors who have a range of identities and range of identities and occupy different social locations? Whenever we do research projects, we always ask ourselves at the end, what does it mean for preparation of counselors and counselor education? What does it mean for counseling practice? And what does it mean for more research moving forward? At the end of the day, and I don't mean to oversimplify this, but at the end of the day, our programs are better when they are more diverse. You can, don't argue with me, argue with who's telling you differently, right? Our programs, students do better. There's tons and tons of research that remind us that the more diverse our programs are, the better outcomes for student learning and engagement take place. And so thinking about the ways we diversify our programs by, one, challenging admissions requirements. Now you're going to hear my political side. If your programs are still using the GRE, I'm telling you, that's always been a barrier to Black folks and other people of color who haven't had the opportunity for standardized test prep, right? So challenging admissions requirements, and I'm using one example, right? Things like the GRE that schools continue to use, and we can ask honest questions about the removal of standardized tests for admission during the COVID era, but then the desire for them to be reinstituted now that we think COVID is under control, and what contributes to that, what motivates that, right? And there's an acknowledgement of relationships between institutions and test prep companies that needs to be acknowledged explicitly, right? So challenging some of those admissions requirements. Bolder recruitment. What does it mean for your counseling program? I don't know what kind of counseling program you were trained in, but I know the counseling programs that I was trained in, there weren't a lot of Black students, and it was unclear about the commitment that our program and faculty had to recruiting more Black students. So what would it mean for your counseling program to say, I'm going to explicitly go to places where they enroll and graduate large numbers of Black and brown students, to go to minority serving institutions? I hate that language, but that's the language of the landscape. What would it mean to go to Hispanic serving institutions? What would it mean to go recruit at historically Black colleges and universities and say, we are going here specifically and intentionally and unapologetically to recruit more racially and ethnically diverse students? And then thinking about that USO acronym, connecting with undergraduate student organizations. Most of the students in the counseling program at Montclair State University at the master's level, most of the students were psychology majors, were child and advocacy majors, were human development and family studies majors. So what would it mean to connect with those student organizations who are connected by major to say, hey, I think we have something that you may be professionally interested in pursuing, right? With respect to counseling practice, the thing that I'll say simply is this: our counselor education programs have to be resources for the clinicians who do the work in the field. And if we're not supporting clinicians who are doing the work in the field, then we're doing them and our profession a disservice. We have to do more than just ask clinicians in the field to house and supervise our students and not give them anything in return. It's a very capitalist, exploitive, oppressive type of relationship. And so we have to do more. We have to honor the folks in the field. We have to invite them to our campus. We have to go to their spaces and be in community with them instead of just saying, hey, y'all come to the university. Hey, y'all supervise our students, and that be that. And then in counseling research, this is just step one, right? Like we're really at the precipice of trying to say to ourselves, what more do we need to learn about what draws people who have been historically excluded to the profession to the profession? That means for Latinx counselors, that means for queer counselors, that means counselors who occupy and represent a range of identities, because we know the counseling profession has excluded them in times and generations past. I'm gonna let Dr. David Julius Ford close this out here.
Make sure I get the benediction so we can pass the offering plate. All right. So what does this mean for us? And the theoretical underpinnings of what we're talking about. Well, race was a salient part of the entire study. Going back to Dr. Adams was talking about with some of the participants, quotes, Black was all throughout what they had said in all of their interviews. The lack of Black, their Blackness being at the forefront, trying to get more Black representation. So it challenges that notion that we are less than. And critical race theory is that framework that challenges this notion that we're always behind the eight ball because the system wasn't built for us. But the participants wanted to build that space that allows the council to be more inclusive. So race was that important factor in all of our participants' quotes. And what we also saw, because race was important, is that their racial identity development was seen throughout the process of all the interviews. And for some of them, being in those spaces was an encounter. For a lot of them, that's what made them cycle back through their identity development. They had been in this place where their Blackness was either non-existent or they had resolved their Blackness, and then from this totally white space was another encounter for them to go back into that emerging experience and realize, damn, I'm still Black. I was in this place where my Blackness and I had become really tight, and now I'm back in a space where it's foreign to me, so I need to reconnect with my Blackness in this white space, and then create a niche in the counseling profession that will embrace my Blackness. And the career counselor in me has to challenge the career development theories that have been based on and normed on white men. Yes, we can look at Super's theory or Marx and Vickers's theory and see some of the underpinnings, but what does that mean for us at the career development of Black people who want to venture into the counseling profession? What can we do to create a career counseling theory that is based on us, for us, by us? And what does that mean for the profession, especially because career is the origin of the counseling profession? So how can we invest in the career development of Black people going to the HBCU, going to your programs? Most of your programs in HBCU are in the South. But how can we capitalize on that and bring more people in those universities that don't have counseling programs into the counseling profession? And then how can we challenge K-Prep to be more open to creating more HBCUs that have counseling programs? And then thirdly, how can we establish more programs? Lastly, Bronfenbrenner's model comes out of social work, Hannon, but it has applications for the counseling profession as well. So I want to concentrate on the micro system. Those are the people, places, and things that have a direct impact on the individual. And all of our participants talked about how their programs, the Black people in their programs, people that inspired them to become counselors, impacted their decision to get to the profession. So we have to also dissect and analyze the not only the microsystem of our participants, but the microsystem that will inspire more Black to become counselors. And then skipping over the meso and exosystem to the macro system, looking at how we can challenge the counseling profession in a way that will have a zeitgeist, if you will, of bringing more Black into the profession. And those of us that are in the profession, what can we do to change it from the inside out? We have to be in those spaces where we can make decisions. We have to be in those spaces where our voices can be heard. We have to be in those spaces where we can challenge those systems. We have to be in those spaces where we can get to leadership to make those decisions. So we have to impact the macro system so that then the micro system is a positive impact on those that want to become counselors. And then they can be more apt to become.
Listen, we said at the top of this is what we aspire to do. We wanted to report on what Black counselors report on their motivations to become counselors, talk a little bit about the systemic ways counseling programs can more effectively recruit, retain, and graduate Black students, and honor the folks who contributed to this study by reporting on their in-depth experiences that sustain or inhibit their professional engagement. We are so grateful for those contributors who participated in this study. We're equally grateful to the CSJ community. Here's our contact information, and we are happy to provide PDF versions of our slide deck to anybody who might ask. We'll turn the floor back over to Dr. Johnson and Dr. Ferguson. Thank you for your time and attention on this Friday afternoon.
Can we just take a quick moment to thank our presenters and all the wonderful information that they have offered us today? I'll put my camera back on as well. If there are any questions that you all would like to have, we have a little bit more time. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, I just noted you can put those questions in the chat and I'll share them out. Okay, so we have one question about where you derive the statistic of 20% of counselors being Black.
Appreciate that question, Chris. If I can address you as such, that was drawn directly from the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics, the same source we use a lot of times in our career counseling courses to direct students to understand market trends for career opportunities. We've been monitoring those Bureau of Labor Statistics stats for some time now as we've worked on this topic.
Yes, so there's a question about will slides be available for the participants? So up to you all.
Yeah, absolutely. Dr. Johnson, I can send them to you if that's okay. And however you decide to distribute them is cool with us.
Perfect. Yes, that'll work. Send them my way and I'll work on that.
How much of yourselves did you see in the findings that were coming up from your participants?
I can answer that. I think it was really hard to remain unbiased when we were analyzing the data, because I personally, I can speak for myself, I was like, dang, I could personally relate to a lot of the things that the people were saying. Like, especially when we started talking about like what kept them motivated to go into the profession, like being a call to action or the representation, seeing more Black people. I know that I joined my doctoral program just from being an MBCC fellow and knowing like, oh snap, do black people could become doctors? Like, and so that was my first introduction into like knowing that there's more for Black people in terms of the counseling profession. So I think we saw, for me personally, I saw a lot of myself, and it was hard to remain like making sure that we were not putting our own opinions in it, and we were really deciphering what it is that the participants are saying and the findings, and not what we think is what they're saying. Y'all want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say,
That's for real.
I would just say that to your question, Dr. White, I would say, yeah, like Shawnee said, I saw and heard myself in there as well. I think, especially for people who I keep reflecting on and hearing about what I'm terming as like a way to like a corrective measure, right? I didn't get the counseling that I needed, so I became the counselor. I didn't get the counseling that I needed, so I became the counselor that I needed, right? We hear a lot of folks talk about that. And I'm beginning to term that, or at least frame that as like, it's almost a corrective measure in our relationships. And so, and not that I had bad counseling experiences as a younger person or over the course of my life, but I know there have been times I've been like, man, I hope you don't ever do that to nobody else, right? And so yeah, I did see and hear some of my own story and the stories that were shared.
And to add to that, I was hoping that, that nobody else has the experience that I've had. I didn't want anybody to have the same experience that I had in my programs with supervisors that had no idea of positivity and made my experiences really bad while I had an internship. And how can I ensure that other Black students, whether it be master's or doctoral students, don't have those experiences?
There is a question that came. Oh, I'm so sorry. Future Dr. Estefanie.
Yeah, no, I just want to second that. I think that like for me working in the mental health field, I observed a lot of concerning behaviors that I was like, ooh, I need to go back to school. I need to get more education on how I can help appropriately. So I think for me, it was more of that call to action.
I got a question to the inbox as well that says the counseling profession is largely known to be mostly female. Is there any research, anything in your research specifically that speaks to the disparity within gender in the Black community in the counseling profession?
These are all great questions. I personally haven't, in my own research opportunities, haven't begun to address gender disparities, except to ask Black men why they choose to become professional counselors. If I had to make some inferences, I would certainly suggest that, or carefully suggest rather, that a lot of this has to do with socialization. And it speaks to how Shawnee was talking about challenging cultural mandates. If we replace the term cultural with gender mandates, somebody might say counseling, because it's a helping profession, is esteemed and framed as something that's more feminine. Certainly, men and boys are socialized to pursue more so-called lucrative and financially higher paying jobs. And so those kinds of things that are associated with status and currency can be a predictor of what careers we choose to pursue. That's something I would just suggest. I don't have anything that's anecdotal. That's just me talking to people and being in community with folks, but I don't have anything to back that up. That's just it's kind of off the dome.
And just to piggyback off of what Dr. Hannon is saying, even when we look at where men are positioned within the counseling profession, they are in higher positions. They are counselor educators. They are directors of programs. So just thinking about like where men are, cis men are in the counseling profession, it kind of aligns a little bit with what Dr. Hannon just said about the kinds of jobs they aspire to have.
We have time for about one or two more questions. One question that came in asks, did the research address the lack of diversity in counseling school subject matter?
You see all of us who had the chance to present, we all laughing. And all of us who have been in programs, we're probably all laughing in the same way. We didn't ask explicitly about, I'm assuming, Anthony, if I'm inferring that right, you're talking about like curricular choices, what kind of classes we get a chance to take in our counseling programs. And we didn't ask explicitly about that. We did though ask about, did participants, had they experienced any forms of anti-Black racism in their training or in their professional experiences. And I think implicitly, they have talked about not seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum. And so while we didn't ask a direct question, it certainly came out in some of their responses. And those are the data with which we're working right now and beginning to make presentations and hopefully write for publication about and just share with the community what we're learning. I don't know if anybody else wants to weigh in on that.
Come see us at the Bridging the Gap Symposium, MBCC, in March. We will be presenting on those findings soon, to be continued.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I believe the last question that I see here that we haven't answered is, and I think y'all are kind of answering it as you go, if there were any other remaining gaps that you'd like to look forward to, that you'd like to pursue in future study.
Like Dr. Hannon said, standing into looking at why Black men go into the counseling profession. I'm looking at other ethnic identities, applying our research to Latina folks, Asian folks, letting the springboard into a lot of that research so we can make the counseling profession more representative of our society.
Well, with that, I will say thank you to our 4 presenters. Let's give it up for them again inside of the comments with your reactions and responses. This is good work, y'all. When we see good work happening, we got to celebrate good work out inside of the community. So thank y'all for your work, your expertise, your voices, and that y'all continue to spread this message of diversifying our field, because we need it. I needed it. So thank you all. Again, look inside of the chat. If you didn't get a chance to see the survey for the CEs, I'm posting it one more time. In order for us to give you CEs, we need your feedback on how you experienced this particular presentation. It's a wonderful presentation. So with that, I just want to thank y'all one more time, and thank you all for participating and observing today's webinar.
Dr. Johnson, may I just, I'm sorry for interrupting. I just want to make sure I give a shout out to Suni Sharma. She initially sent the invitation and I didn't think she was here today, which isn't an excuse to not mention her. So I want to make sure I say her name before we get off the line.
Yes.
Thank you for that.
Doc. Thank
That's
you.
my doc bestie.
Yes.
We love it. We love it. We love it. The love is rich in this room. So thank you all. Thank you to the research committee. Thank you for future Dr. Suni and Dr. Ferguson for their work. And thank you all for being here on this Friday afternoon. And with that, I say farewell and take care. Bye, y'all.